This is Panama, a small country in Central America, and it has something fascinating. Here it is, the Panama Canal. If you look a bit north or south, the landmass seems much wider everywhere else, while here, Panama is the thinnest point. You don't even need a ruler to see it. And the problem is, because of one narrow choke point, the economies of dozens of countries can end up taking a hit. See for yourself. This is the shortest route between the Pacific and the Atlantic. Containers, oil, everything that needs to move fast goes through here, so you send ships along this route and they just don't move. The canal turns into a traffic jam. All those dots are different vessels. In 2023 and 2024, many of them simply couldn't pass through the Panama Canal quickly. They had to wait. And while they waited, the world was losing millions of dollars every single day. The worst part is that this can happen again and again. And just when it seems like everyone will be stuck in that queue, Panama steps onto the stage again, this time with a surprise. This line is a new Panama Canal, but it's not like the old one. Let's zoom out for a second. Here's the US on a map, and over here is Asia, including China. Panama's surprise is most appealing to these players because it's building a pipeline that can move a critical resource between two oceans, gas. But why call it a new Panama Canal? The scale is much smaller, and at first glance, there seems to be fewer stakeholders. Well, this story is more complicated than it looks. You're about to see what's really going on. Lake versus trade. Ships are stuck in traffic jams in the Panama Canal. It looks like an accident, politics, or some kind of emergency. But no, the truth is simpler and scarier. The Panama Canal was brought to a halt by plain old water. Because the Panama Canal isn't just a hole between two oceans, it's a giant elevator for ships. Vessels don't simply sail across Panama, they're raised and lowered by locks. And those locks run on fresh water. Every single transit literally flushes hundreds of thousands of gallons out of one specific place, Gatun Lake. Here it is on the map. And that supply is what's running low. But doesn't something feel off? The lake is enormous, so how can it be running out of water? There's a catch. It lives off rainfall. But when one of the worst droughts in decades hit Panama in 2023 and 2024, the situation started to look absurd. Ocean everywhere, but not enough fresh water to operate the canal. In the end, it was basic physics that dealt the final blow. As the lake level drops, the canal authority has to ration water, cut the number of transits per day, and impose stricter limits on the ship's draft. Because a heavy ship with a deep draft is riskier, and it takes more water to move through the locks. The canal turned into a place with lots of ships, but not enough water capacity to push them through. That's where the queues come from. And the worst part is, a ship can't just wait calmly. The logic is simple. Time is money. Every extra day at sea means more fuel burned, more crew pay, and a bigger headache for logistics. Yes, some ships ended up waiting 2 to 3 weeks, and others just turned around and went the long way around the Cape of Good Hope or Cape Horn. That adds thousands of extra nautical miles, literally forcing global shipping routes to be redrawn because one lake didn't have enough water. And as a nasty bonus, the losses were massive. But you know what? One resource turned out to be central to this whole story, and because of it, Panama felt the hit directly. Because in recent years, it's become the canal's main cargo. That resource is U.S. gas. The United States has been shipping propane and butane to Asian markets via Panama, along with ethane, the raw material used to make ethylene. That's the building block for plastics, packaging, and a lot of the chemical industry. In other words, this isn't just another commodity, it's a critical one. But does the Panama Canal really matter that much here? See for yourself. In recent years, about 95% of trade in these products has been moving through Panama on specialized vessels. And now the flow is getting choked off by drought conditions. The U.S. loses billions, and Panama also misses out on major transit fees from gas carriers. It sounds pretty nasty. So both Panama and the U.S. started asking the same question. Can this liquefied gas trade be made more secure? And that's where Panama makes a move that sounds like history repeating itself, only even stranger. The country's planning to cut across the continent again, not with a canal this time, but with a pipeline. Pipeline to the rescue. So Panama has decided to make a move that sounds almost absurd. Build a new canal that doesn't need water at all. The idea surfaced in 2025 and quickly started to make sense. If LNG carriers are getting squeezed by shortages of fresh water, then why not take water out of the equation entirely? In other words, they need to lay a separate route designed specifically for gas. But there's a catch. Panama isn't flat. It's mountains and jungle, rivers and lakes. Where do you run a pipeline without turning construction into a full-on battle with the landscape? The answer turned out to be simple: right next to the Panama Canal. Why not? That corridor already has the country's main backbone: roads, power lines, service areas, security, and logistics. But most importantly, it's far easier to build along the canal than to blast through untouched regions where every foot costs twice as much. So what is this project exactly? It's a dry land bridge between two oceans, about 47 miles of pipeline meant to move gas from the Atlantic to the Pacific. But the most important part isn't the pipe itself. The real system starts at the shoreline. So what's so interesting about it? On the Atlantic side, they plan to build major terminals. That's where cargo is received, routed, stored in tanks, pressure and operating conditions are stabilized, and then the gas is fed into the pipeline. On the Pacific side, it's quite the opposite. Gas comes out of the pipeline into storage, goes through checks and controls, and then gets loaded onto ships bound for Asia. Essentially, it's a conveyor belt where the limiting factor isn't water speed or lake levels, but system pressure and terminal infrastructure. And that still isn't the most interesting part. The US and Panama are actually aiming for something far more radical than it looks at first glance. American LNG tankers that are currently lining up at the Panama Canal locks on their way to Asia are supposed to be taken off the route. The gas would move entirely through a pipeline instead, and to be clear, we're talking about flows that aren't just huge, they grow year after year, which raises the obvious question: can a pipeline really handle that kind of pressure? Well, it doesn't have much choice. The pipeline's design capacity is estimated at about 2.5 million barrels per day, an enormous volume. That's a full-fledged energy corridor. And what about the price tag? It won't be cheap. Current estimates put the project at $4 to $8 billion. No, it's not $70 billion like building a brand new canal, but it's still enough money to change the rules of the game. So when does this actually happen? Right now, the project isn't happening on a construction site. It's happening in conference rooms, where infrastructure decisions for decades ahead get made. In fall 2025, the Panama Canal Authority officially launched the bidding process. By the end of 2026, a winner should be selected, and after that, things get a lot more tangible. If the schedule holds, pipe laying in Panama could start in 2027. By 2030, this overland Atlantic to Pacific link is expected to be operating at full capacity. So yes, it's a long wait, and that's the frustrating part. Because if it happens, this pipeline could turn everything upside down. Let me explain how it works. New reality. So imagine a gas pipeline built alongside the Panama Canal. It reliably moves gas from one coast to the other, letting US LNG carriers avoid passing through the canal. What happens next? The first big winner would be Panama. Lines would shrink, delays would drop, and the canal could handle a wider mix of cargo with fewer disruptions. Less congestion means fewer economic losses, steadier transit revenue, and more predictable planning for the entire logistics system. But those are indirect gains. Panama wouldn't be transporting American gas through this pipeline for free, so how much would the country actually earn? On paper, it looks very attractive. Estimates suggest Panama could make roughly $1 to $1.2 billion per year from U.S. gas transit fees. Officials also expect the pipeline to contribute up to 3.6% of Panama's GDP, which would be a huge boost for the country's economy. And that's not the whole story. It's a major project, so it would require a lot of manpower. Thousands, possibly even tens of thousands of workers. That means the same scale of new jobs. After construction, the pipeline would still need maintenance. That sounds like a liability. Would Panama get any benefits from that stage too? Yes. The practical payoff is that it could help reduce unemployment. Panama has struggled with that, but this project could move the needle in the right direction. What about the US? What do they stand to gain? The first and most obvious benefit is reduced losses from congestion. Once the pipeline's in place, American LNG tankers won't have to sit in line waiting to transit the Panama Canal. They'll offload at the terminal and head straight back. But would the US be that interested in a new pipeline just for that? No, because Washington has another goal it can achieve with the Panama gas pipeline. Today, the US is one of the world's leading LNG producers. And with this new pipeline, the country could increase export volumes. That means more revenue, potentially billions of dollars more. So what's the bottom line? Everyone's waiting for the new pipeline to launch, and it almost feels like the Panama Canal has been forgotten. Though actually, Panama has a whole mega project worth over $1 billion that's supposed to improve the situation. Panama's new lake. Gatun Lake is running short on water. Look, every single ship transit through the canal uses up about 50 million US gallons. And it doesn't get recycled or pumped back, it simply flows away and is gone. So the most straightforward solution is obvious: store more water in advance. But where? That's how the plan emerged to build a major new reservoir on the Indio River. The river lies west of the canal's existing water system, and Panama has decided to turn its flow into an extra store of fresh water. Essentially, the country wants to create another buffer it can draw on during the dry months when the usual sources fall short. So what exactly does this project involve? The project envisions building an artificial reservoir that would become part of the canal's broader water management system. Water could be routed from it through a tunnel or canal into existing lakes, or used directly to operate the locks, making up for losses during droughts. For the Panama Canal, this is something new. But will it actually help? According to the Panama Canal Authority's estimates, the new reservoir could raise the maximum possible throughput by roughly 12 to 13 additional ships per day. For global trade, that's a massive difference because every extra transit isn't just one vessel, it's an entire supply chain moving faster. It all sounds incredibly complex, which immediately raises the next question: how much could something like this cost? A lot. The project is priced at several billion dollars, and the most interesting thing is Panama isn't planning to bring in outside financing, even though the canal underpins so much of the world economy. The country intends to pay for it out of revenue from the waterway itself, even as those revenues are under pressure. But if the project is that beneficial, maybe it's worth risking the expense. Are there downsides? Unfortunately, there are. The Indio River project would significantly reduce the canal's vulnerability to drought, but it doesn't change the core reality. The canal is increasingly at the mercy of unpredictable weather. So the reservoir is a way to buy time, and over time, it could also run low. Which means there's no truly long-term fix on the horizon for the canal. Is there anything else that could solve the water level problem once and for all? There is, and humanity is quite good at it. You just have to make it rain. Magic solution. The very first biggest question is, how do you actually make clouds give up their moisture? The method has been around for a long time. It's called cloud seeding. There's no magic trick. The idea is simple. You spray certain substances into clouds that already exist, things like silver iodide, dry ice, or even ordinary salt. Those particles act as condensation nuclei that water vapor can cling to. Droplets grow heavier, and the cloud has a better chance of dumping rain instead of just drifting by. Sounds awesome, but does that mean you can switch rain on anywhere? Experience from different countries suggests yes, it can work. The most frequently cited example is the United Arab Emirates. Their government program has been running for over 20 years, and according to official figures, rainfall in targeted areas can be increased by about 10 to 35% compared with normal levels. To do that, they fly hundreds of missions each year using planes and drones that literally hunt for the right clouds over the desert. China went even further, turning cloud seeding into a national-scale industry. It's the largest program in the world, thousands of operations a year and tens of thousands of specialists involved. In China specifically, from the mid-1990s to the early 2000s, these operations reportedly added tens of trillions of cubic feet of precipitation. Impressive. But there's an important caveat. Cloud seeding only works when there are already clouds to work with. It's basically an attempt to squeeze a little extra rain out of what's already there. How well it works depends on a fickle mix of conditions: humidity, temperature, and a bunch of other important variables. It's also impossible to predict the outcome in advance, and even harder to measure how much extra rain it actually produced. That's why the technique has been used for decades, especially in dry regions, but even there, it doesn't deliver consistent results. Which raises an obvious question: could it save the Panama Canal? The idea has in fact been discussed. Some experts suggested flying aircraft over Panama and dispersing salt particles into clouds to boost rainfall and replenish the reservoirs the canal depends on. In theory, it's a neat chain reaction. More rain means more water in the lakes, which means fewer restrictions on shipping. In practice, though, it's still mostly talk. Panama doesn't have an approved program or permanent cloud seeding infrastructure. It's not an active project or an operating system, more like an emergency option that pops up now and then in analytical reports and media coverage. In other words, nobody's actually ordering rain over the canal yet. So the conclusion is this. Among near-term solutions, the only real rescue plan is building a gas pipeline, and it'll be done despite the difficulties. After all, Panama can draw on the experience of other countries that have built incredibly complex pipelines. Heated pipeline. Western Uganda isn't just rolling green hills and national parks. Beneath that ground lies oil, and quite a lot of it. For the country, it's a huge opportunity. Exports, revenue, a chance to build a new economy. The problem is geography. Uganda is landlocked. The ocean is hundreds of miles away. Oil won't get there on its own, so it has to be transported. And not by trucks, but on an industrial scale, through a pipeline, across borders, through another country, all the way to the Indian Ocean. And so the idea was born to extend the oil artery through Tanzania to the port of Tanga. The project is massive. It's a pipeline about 897 miles long. Roughly 186 miles run through Uganda and another 713 miles through Tanzania. On paper, it sounds straightforward. Pump the oil, move it to the coast, load it onto a tanker, and ship it to buyers. Long pipelines aren't unusual, so what's the catch here? It's the oil itself. This isn't light, free-flowing crude, it's thick and heavy, and when it cools, it starts behaving like cold honey. As the temperature drops, it thickens, slows down, and can literally stop inside the pipe. That's why it has to stay hot, around 122 degrees Fahrenheit, the whole way. How do you do that? The pipeline is being designed as an insulated, partially heated system. The pipe is wrapped in thermal insulation, and an electric heating line runs along the route, switching on whenever temperatures start to drop. In other words, the oil is kept warm throughout the journey so it doesn't turn into thick, sluggish sludge. That's why this project is expected to go down in history as the longest heated oil pipeline in the world. And that creates several major problems. From an engineering standpoint, it's the full package. Higher electricity costs, complex temperature control, and strict demands on materials and day-to-day operations. And that's not even the whole story. The route crosses dozens of mountain, desert, and forest regions. To make the system work, they had to build 6 pumping stations. So this isn't just a pipe anymore, it's an entire industrial organism. And now, the most interesting part, where did they build this pipeline? Well, that's where things get complicated. Thousands of people were relocated from land that fell within the construction corridor. That sparked protests, criticism, and constant scrutiny from NGOs. For some, the new pipeline is an economic opportunity for the region. For others, it's the loss of land and an uncertain future. And the big question is, with all these challenges, did the project even make it to the finish line? As of early 2026, the route is estimated to be about 79% complete. A large portion of the pipe has already been welded, insulation work has begun, and key infrastructure elements are in place. If the schedule doesn't slip, technical completion and launch preparations are expected between July and October 2026. That's when Ugandan oil should finally reach global markets for the first time. In short, this is one of the most complex pipelines in the world. Still, elsewhere in Africa, there's another oil route that cuts across desert terrain and highly tense conflict zones. Chronically unstable region. We're heading to Niger. The country has had oil for a long time. That part isn't news. The real news is that for years, Niger couldn't do much with it. All around are equally poor neighbors who aren't exactly lining up to buy someone else's crude, and to sell it to the global market, you need access to the ocean. The problem is simple. Niger is landlocked. And that's where the real engineering and politics adventure begins. What do you do when your country is stuck in the middle of the continent? The answer was both obvious and risky. Make a deal with Benin. Benin has a coastline, a port, and access to shipping routes, so the plan was to build a pipeline. Sounds logical, but from that moment on, everything started going down the hardest possible path. The pipeline was meant to run about 1,212 miles. That makes it the longest oil pipeline in Africa. Not a local line, not a domestic project, but a continental record. Yet the length is only the first problem on the list. The bigger question is, how do you even operate something that massive? The route cuts through the Sahel, a remote, semi-arid belt along the edge of the Sahara. Temperatures there regularly rise above 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Rain is scarce. Building in those conditions is difficult. Maintaining it is even harder. Every pumping station, every service road becomes a separate logistics mission in desert-like terrain. But even that isn't the worst part. The most fragile component of the whole system is politics. After Niger's 2023 military coup, borders with neighbors started closing. At one point, Benin simply stopped allowing oil to move through its port because Niger hadn't reopened the land border for trade. So the pipeline built for exports ended up effectively blocked. Did that end the conflict? Not at all. Benin repeatedly accused Niger of violating terminal access rules and safety requirements. It went as far as arrests of workers at the facility and the introduction of new administrative hurdles. The pipeline exists, the oil exists, but reliable exports don't. And that's not all. And then there's the region's other reality, security. In 2024, armed groups attacked a section of the pipeline, threatened further strikes, and issued demands. In conditions like that, every mile of pipe isn't just infrastructure, it's a potential flashpoint. So in the end, the Niger-Benin pipeline sits in a dangerous place both geographically and politically. And together with earlier African pipeline projects, it proves that you can force an oil or gas route through almost any obstacle.